Hey Flight Test friends, in this segment I'm going to show you how to quickly and easily install servos into your airframe. Once we go over servo installation, I'm then going to show you how to set your push rod length and how to install your control horns. This is fast and easy. Let's get started. In addition to your servos, your push rods, and your control horns, you're also going to need a set of pliers and a pair of wire cutters. Even though they do come centered from the manufacturer, I always like to have a servo centering tool on hand. I will be showing you how to use a servo centering tool in this segment as well. The aircraft we're going to be using for today's example is the T-28 Trojan. The methods I use to install the servos into this aircraft are the same methods I use in nearly every aircraft I have designed. You can see here that I've got two servos set side by side. One of the control arms is pointed to the right, one of them is pointed to the left. We're going to be mounting our servos on either side of the spline coming out of the tail section. We're going to be placing one servo here and one on the other side. If you're building a twin motor aircraft, oftentimes you will not need a rudder servo. If that's the case, you will only need to install one servo to control the elevator. To install the control rod, I'm simply going to feed the Z-bend through the outermost hole of the control arm. Once that's done, I'm going to feed the push rod into the push rod housing. We're going to be gluing the servo in place right here as we talked about a minute ago. I want to double check that I don't have any binding. Once I'm happy with the servo placement, I'm going to flip the servo over and using a razor blade, I'm going to scratch the casing. This will really help the servo adhere to the spline. Add some glue and set my servo in place. I'm going to hold this for about 2 minutes, then we're going to flip it over and do the same on the other side. One thing I do want to point out, if you have a decal on the side that you're going to be gluing, make sure to remove that decal prior to gluing the servo in place. Once the decal's been removed, the installation is the same as on the other side. To hook up our servo centering tool, we first need to connect our ESC. It's important that we hook our ESC up correctly. We want to make sure that the yellow wire is going to the signal pin. The signal pin is here on top. The signal pin will be identified by a small diagram printed on the housing. Once our ESC is connected, we need to hook up our servos. Again, we need to make sure that the yellow wire is going to the signal pin. I've got 3 slots. I'm going to hook it up there in the middle. It doesn't really matter which one you do. I'll run the second one in. Once the wires have been connected, we will need to plug the battery into the ESC. You will notice that the servo will rotate and max out travel in one direction once the battery has been connected. Servo tools have 3 settings: manual, centered, and auto. Let's take a look at each of the settings. When you first plug in the battery, the default setting on the servo centering tool is manual. In this mode, you can rotate the dial manually and move your servos. To change the servo centering tool to the neutral mode, simply hit the button located down at the bottom corner. When we put the servo centering tool in the neutral position, the arms of the servos go to the midpoint. Whenever we begin making Z-bends on the push rods, we will be in the neutral mode. The third mode is auto. In this setting, the control arms will move back and forth continuously. To get back to the neutral setting, I'm going to hit the mode button twice. This will bring the servo arms back to the midpoint. For this next step, we're going to add Z-bends to the push rod. We will be leaving our servo centering tool on for this step. To make a Z-bend, I'm going to grab the wire directly above the hinge. Next, I'm going to bend the wire 90 degrees. Then I'm going to grab the wire right at the bend and bend the wire straight backwards. Once that's done, I'm going to cut off the excess about 1/4 inch from the last bend. Now let's do the same thing on the rudder. For the rudder, I'm going to grab the wire right at the hinge and I'm going to bend the wire straight up. Next, I'm going to grab the wire right at the bend and bend the wire straight back. Just like before, I'm going to cut off the excess 1/4 inch from the last bend. And we've now created 2 Z-bends. Now we've got our Z-bends, let's open up the cavity for our control horns. To open up the cavity for the control horns, I'm going to use either a screwdriver or a barbecue skewer to open up the cut right here in the rudder. Now that the slot's been open, let's run the Z-bend through the hole in the control horn. Next, I want to do a test fit. I'm going to push the control horn into the slot that I made. Now what I want to do is I want to take a look at this from the top. I want to make sure that my rudder is in the neutral position. As I'm looking at it from the top, I notice that my rudder is off to one side. I'm simply going to slide my control horn slightly forward until the rudder is in the neutral position. Once I'm happy with the position, I'm going to pull the control horn out, add a small amount of glue to the slot, and I'm going to reinsert the control horn. Let that cool down for a couple minutes and we'll do the same thing on the elevator. Just like we did on the rudder, we're first going to open up the slot using a screwdriver or barbecue skewer. Next, we're going to run the Z-bend through the hole in the control horn. And we're going to do a test fit. That looks good. Add a bead of glue. And reinsert the control horn. We'll let that cool down. Then we're going to test the movement on the 2 control surfaces. Once the glue's had a chance to cool down, I'm going to switch modes on my servo centering tool. I'm going to put it in the auto setting. Once I get it in the auto setting, I'm going to check for interference. I want to ensure that when my control surfaces are moving, they aren't impacting with any other parts. I'm noticing right away that the trailing edge of my elevator is making contact with my rudder. Using a razor blade, I'm going to remove material to get rid of the interference. Now let's check it one more time. Looks like we've got rid of all the interference. I'm happy with how this turned out. Let's do the main wing. Just like I did with the rudder and elevator servos, you'll see that I've got the arms pointing in opposite directions. Before we install our aileron servos, we first need to add extensions. I'm going to make sure that my wire colors are matched up, and I'm simply going to connect the extension to the servo lead. Once it's connected, I'm going to apply a piece of tape. I want to make sure these don't come loose. Let's do the same thing on the other side. When installing the servo, I want to make sure that the arm is pointing in the correct direction. There's always going to be a knockout towards the trailing edge of the wing. I want to make sure that my arm is on the same side as the knockout. Push your wire as far as it'll go. You'll probably need to have gravity help you out to get it all the way through. Once your wire's been run through, add a small bead of glue around the edge of the servo. Hold your servo in place for a full 2 minutes and then do the same on the other side. Once both servos have been installed, let's hook a Y connector to the extensions. Again, I want to make sure that my colors are lined up correctly. And just like before, I want to tape the connections. Once that's done, let's install the control rods. With our servos in the neutral position, I'm going to begin by opening up the slot on the aileron. Next, I'm going to run my Z-bend through the outermost hole on the control arm. I'm going to grab the wire right above the hinge, and I'm going to bend the wire 90 degrees towards the center. Grab the wire at the bend and bend the wire straight back. And we're going to cut off the excess 1/4 inch from the last bend. Next, I'm going to run the Z-bend through the hole in the control horn. Give this a quick test fit. You can see that my aileron is almost in the neutral position. I'm going to move it just a little bit. There we go, that looks good. I'm going to pull that out, fill the cavity with glue, and reinsert the control horn. We'll let that cool for a couple minutes and flip it around and do the same thing on the other side. Now that we've got our servos installed and everything's centered up, let's move on to the next video in our playlist.